so this book is really about, you know, for anybody, whether you're a mom or a dad, right? But specifically for dads in this book is that
Yeah.
it's not always, man, those big momentous moments in your kids' life, right? Like, going to school for the first time, right? Or riding your bike for the first time. It's all those small moments that we need to make sure that we recognize and capture with our kids.
Mm.
Like, just something simple as, just kind of going on a walk, right? Or, picking up your daughter from daycare, right?
Right.
And your daughter's just in the backseat, just, blah, 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 just talking, right? Just
Yep.
talking, just, whatever. And that interaction you have, not looking at each other, but just kind of talking to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of small moments that we don't often recognize or we don't see as very important moments. Well, no, those are huge moments.
Hey, what's going on? This episode is sponsored by Lamar Hill. He's the founder of 4 Elements Therapy. He's also the author of a brand new book called Are You My Daddy, which you can pick up on Amazon.com today. Look, this book is aimed at lifting up all fathers through diversity and grace. It's not necessarily the big moments in our children's lives that define us as fathers and make the greatest impact. Rather, all the small, unnoticed moments in between that build the strongest foundation with our kids. In this book, he wants to capture the importance of those smaller moments, however we can relate to them. Read it with your children and families, or even alone, and allow yourself grace as a father and recognize it is our privilege and honor to be dads. Make sure you pick up Are You My Daddy today on Amazon.com. Lamar, you're a father, mental health consultant, founder of 4 Elements Therapy. You're also an author and much, much more, man. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on again.
I'd love to go back to the beginning with my guest. You were born into some serious trauma. You were raised in a foster care since age 3. But where did you grow up? What was childhood like for you, man?
Oh man, childhood, from that birth to age 3 to 4, kind of grew up, didn't know my father. My father was a military Air Force guy. Never knew him. Maybe have vague, kind of snapshot images of who he was, but never knew him. My mom, Native American, really kind of struggled with, substance abuse and mental illness, and ultimately ended up taking her own life, which is kind of how we ended up in foster care. So, yeah,
Man.
so that's kind of what it was for the first, couple of years of my life was just a lot of life that was reflective of somebody who just kind of really struggled with a lot of issues. And so a lot of trauma, a lot of things that I can remember that, as far as kind of stamp memories, that weren't very positive memories. And so,
Sure.
That's kind of like how I started out my life. And so, but fortunately, I got into foster care, got into a remarkable family who, and parents who are still my parents today. So,
Come on.
So I was very fortunate to be able to not be kind of recycled in and out of the foster care system. And so I had a good family that provided some stability, and then kind of some of the other things that I struggled with later on in my teens and 20s, and part of my 30s were just things that could have been a lot worse if I didn't have that support and love from my family. So
Yeah. Wow, man.
yeah.
I mean, there's so many people that I think they grow up in, and then they tend to stay in this generational cycle. And you obviously had this awesome family that kind of raised you out of that. But for those that feel like their life is what it is, but they know that they're called to do more, to make a bigger impact, but they're not sure how, what things can they do mentally to break the cycle to get away from that?
I think one of the things is kind of looking at your situation, right? And again, it's easier for me maybe than to a lot of people to say, hey, I had this rocky foundation right away, but then, kind of it got really shored up and solidified with my parents. And so it's really easy to say, hey, these are things you can do, right? When you have the resources to support that. But I think the biggest thing is kind of recognition and being able to talk about kind of the things that you struggle with, right? And recognizing, right? Like, where are the areas that I struggle in life, and how do those impact, what I'm doing, and if I'm kind of just cycling through, am I able to recognize what's happening, and then am I able to kind of work myself out of, that cycle? And so that's recognition is for a lot of things, right? Recognition is half the battle, right? And so
Absolutely agree, man. I came from the crazy broken home as well. And it wasn't until I sat down with a counselor and started to recognize all those things that I was going through that was in my life that I was like, oh, all right, now it's time to stop that cycle, right?
yep, patterns,
Yep. One of the things that I was intrigued by on your website is you mentioned that you have a perspective of both macro and microsystems theory.
yeah.
What is macro microsystems theory?
So basically, the systems theory is essentially, Yuri, Rothenbrenner, right, is basically stating that we are all a part of, a bigger operating system, right? And so we don't operate in a vacuum, and we don't operate just kind of in these silos, right? That, whether we're in a family, right, there's a family systems theory, right? Like we're a part of, an operating system, and um, from the macro to the communities in which we live, right, to the states in which we live, right. It's how are these systems, how are these entities of support, or whether it's a school, therapy, what any kind of um, world that we kind of operate in, it has an impact on us. And so what we do kind of ripples through other systems, right, and it has an effect on the system, as well as what happens with the system, right? So you think about what's happened with the pandemic, right? And what that did to our unemployment program, right?
Yeah.
What it did to our unemployment program in terms of it, it was a system that seems to, be a struggling system, right? And then now you got all these furloughed, employers and furloughed employees who are trying to access. Now, how do we live, right, when everything's basically shut down, right? And so now you have this influx in demand on a system that's already struggling to provide consistent support, right? Mm. Now we have a system that can't necessarily shoulder the influx of need, right? And so now you have that kind of a dynamic that kind of goes and kind of ripples into individuals, right?
Gotcha.
And now how do I function, right? Like I'm still waiting to hear back from unemployment about, what can I expect? Where's my application, right? And so you had a lot of people, and friends included, who, really were impacted by the pandemic and that systems theory, right? Like everything kind of has a rippling effect. It's like when you throw a pebble into a lake or a body of water, right? Things kind of ripple out, right? And so,
yeah.
And that can happen reverse wise too. We can have something happen to a system and have that ripple in and affect people individually. And so,
right.
So that's kind of what I like to do. That's kind of the brain that I feel like I carry is one is being able to understand kind of the macro system, what's going on with you individually, right? And how does that impact, and how do your immediate surroundings impact you, right? All the way to the bigger system, right? So, poverty, right? How does poverty kind of maintain, the struggles in which you existed, right? And so it kind of goes into that, once you kind of get into poverty, it's hard to get out because the system struggles, to provide, blanket support and individualized kind of support to people, right? And so that's kind of what I like to look at and help people kind of, it's kind of a good thing to help people look at the larger systems, right? And realize that, hey, some of your struggles that you're having, isn't necessarily just unique to you, right? This is kind of a systems issue, right? And so now how do we help you look at that in terms of, hey, that's not necessarily something that I bring to the table. It's just me having to react to and try to survive within, systems that aren't necessarily fluid.
Right.
Wow. And so that can be a nice way of kind of helping people, kind of maintain or gain some perspective on, hey, it's not just you, and it's not because you have an inability to function, right, or do some of these things, although that may be part of it. It's, man, you're trying to live and operate and function within a system that is a little bit wobbly.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
man. And with your clients, you do something called motivational interviewing, which is a directive, client-centered counseling style for eliciting behavioral change. What types of things do you walk people through in this style?
Just really trying to, kind of hold and validate kind of their experiences, their values, and their beliefs, kind of where they're at, right? There's a story, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got a story that we need to validate, and we need to make sure that we understand and listen, right? Um, but again, folks can get really stuck into that narrative of their life and their experiences and their lived experiences, right? And so the motivational interviewing piece is, okay, how do we hold this, your existence and your experiences with, now how do we help you envision and kind of embody, a different direction, a life that, that's much more in line with what you want or what you kind of envision for yourself.
Yeah.
And so, we, again, and as therapists, I think we can kind of get lost, within our clients at times with all of the history, right? Because they want to talk about everything, right? Let's go back and rehash. Well, I don't necessarily know if we need to rehash everything, but we can start identifying patterns.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we can, so then we can start looking at, hey, we don't have to necessarily process this particular situation because this is a pattern, right? And so then we don't have to get lost in, really processing every specific situation, right?
Yep.
And again, it's recognition. Okay. So if we know what the pattern is, if we know kind of what are the similarities, now we can start prepping and planning for, now how are we going to make changes, right? Now what are we going to do differently?
Right. Wow.
And so you really got to kind of hold that with, okay, so let's flip over and start thinking about, how are we, what are things that we can control, and how can we begin to kind of put some plans into place for you to really capitalize on those things. And then hopefully slowly but surely, they start changing the narrative, right? Of
Yep.
their story, right? Now the narrative starts becoming more about success, right?
Love that.
So,
Love that.
yeah.
Is there a common theme that you see from clients that come to see you? Like, what's that common struggle that you're able to help folks with?
Just overwhelmed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then, again, especially with the, the political climate of the last, really the last 5 years, right? And then
Sure.
you add the pandemic on, and then you add the reemergence, so to speak, of the pandemic, right?
Yep. Man.
People are just, kind of deer in the headlights, right? They don't know what's coming next, right? They don't know, you got some people who are just like, well, wait, I'm just not going to do anything because I want things to go back to normal, right? Well, listen, you can wait for a long time, right? Because for a fact, you should know that things probably won't go back to normal.
Right.
Right. And do you want things to go back to normal?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is kind of a nice time, I think. And even though, people are really kind of trying to figure out and navigate through and hold on to kind of what's happening, right? This is also a time to say, hey, now's a time where we can really start making some changes, right? Not only just individually, but on systems level, right? Now we can really start evaluating our programs and say, hey, if there's any chance, if there's any time to really start changing and looking at our programs, now is the time.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I see a lot of, is just people just like, man, I don't know what just happened. Right.
Yeah.
Like the last 4 years we blinked, and last 4 or 5 years, right? And you got the last 2 years of the COVID. And so people are just like, just kind of spinning. Their heads are spinning.
Yeah, totally.
So that's kind of the biggest thing that I see more recently and currently, is just, people just struggling and not knowing what's coming next, or
right.
We got the mask stuff going on, and so people are a little bit, maybe a lot more aligned with people who kind of look and sound and think like them.
Sure.
Right. So now I feel like we've kind of gotten into this. Now we're kind of segregating.
Yep.
Into groups, right? And it's because of fear, and we don't know what's going to happen. So we're going to segregate to like-minded people, right? People who look like us, right? People who think like us, right? Which then really exacerbates anxiety, right?
Yes.
Because I can't see your face, I can't see you, right? And the mask is an indicator that, we got to keep distance, right? Rather than coming together, right? We got to keep our distance. And so it's a trying time, but also an interesting time, kind of clinically and therapeutically right now. So.
For sure. Man, it's so good though. Like, I mean, and that's so true. All that stuff you just mentioned, and the segregation, all of that stuff is just crazy. And people definitely struggling and just feeling lost, man. I wanted to kind of transition here a little bit though, because you've got this awesome new book that just dropped. It's called "Are You My Daddy?" And what I've seen from it on Amazon, it looks amazing. What was the motivation behind writing this book? And for those who don't know, what's this book about?
So the motivation of writing this book actually just came just by chance. I was visiting one of my best friends, and he's got four young kids, all back to back to back to back, and and three out of the four, have some neurological disabilities. Some of them have some developmental, kind of milestone issues, right? So three out of his four kiddos, kind of have some special needs, and he's a single dad, just kind of more recently divorced, and him and I have, talked a lot of, a lot. He's called me a lot, and kind of wanted to know and kind of pick my brain on situations with his kids, and so we've had a lot of contact, and I provide a lot of support, and he provides me with a lot of support. And so last October, I went down and visited him in Wisconsin, and we were just kind of sitting around, and he had some neighbors, and his neighbors were telling a story about this big guy, because he used to be this offensive lineman. And so this big guy walking across the street holding this container of goods, and he's got four of his kids kind of trailing him, right? And you kind of see this big offensive line. He's not that big anymore, but
Right.
you got these four little kids that are like, probably 6 and under, right? And just, trailing along their dad walking across the street. And so we were kind of laughing about that. And I just said, that would be a book. That'd be a good idea for a book. And so came home, and it just kind of stuck with me. And I talked to him a little bit about it and said, hey, I kind of really have this idea of this book. Initially, the book was going to be completely about him and his kids, and the likeness of him and his kids, but then it kind of evolved as I was kind of in my kind of creation mode of it, to really start reflecting all that, right? And what it means to be a dad. And just because, one, I think dads often don't get a lot of recognition.
Sure.
And in some pockets, some dads maybe aren't as deserving, right, of that. But I mean, that's kind of a judgment thing, right? But for every one of those dads, I know there's equally more dads, that are doing the best they can, and really trying to be there for their kids, right? And so this book is really about, for anybody, whether you're a mom or a dad, right? But specifically for dads in this book, is that it's not always, man, those big momentous moments in your kids' life, right? Like, going to school for the first time, right? Or riding your bike for the first time. It's all those small moments that we need to make sure that we recognize and capture with our kids. Like, just something simple as, just kind of going on a walk, right? Or, picking up your daughter from daycare, right? And your daughter's just in the backseat, just, blah, 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 just talking, right? Just talking, just, whatever. And that interaction you have, not looking at each other, but just kind of talking to each other, right? Those are kind of small moments that we don't often recognize, or we don't see as very important moments. Well, no, those are huge moments.
Yeah.
And so, so that was, so that's kind of how the book evolved into. The book doesn't read beginning, middle, and end of the story.
Sure. Yeah.
But each page is a reflection of different kind of cultures, different dynamics, different parts of the region, in terms of which we live, right? So there's an agricultural farming scene in there that is reflective of North Dakota. I mean, we do these things, and dads as farmers, spend many, many, many late nights harvesting and planting, and then don't get to see that much of their kids during those times, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a scene where, there's a child sitting with his dad in the combine, and the sun's going down, right? And the dad's talking like, hey, it's my honor to be able to provide, for my family and for people, right? And I'm honored to be your dad, to kind of show you these things, right? And to talk to you about these things. Why do I do what we do? Yes. So that's kind of what it's been about. It's about honoring fathers, honoring my, one of my best friends, and honoring all my friends who are fathers, but also then to have people be able to kind of reflect on each particular page, right, and say, hey, yeah, I remember this, right, and as for a dad, I'd be like, yeah, I do remember that time that that I dropped off my son to mom's house or whatever, right, and remember feeling that gut punch, right, that, I'm gonna miss my child, right, and so. I think it's just kind of a nice way to let people know too that, hey, as fathers, hey, we do have feelings, right? And we do hurt, right? And we do get sad, right? And we do miss our kids, right? And we do have a fear of not being able to have all the answers or know what to do all the time, right? And so I guess that's really what it's about.
Yeah.
And so
that's amazing. My kids are 11 and 8, and I definitely have those moments where I had to travel for work and miss my son's baseball games. And that was that, punch to the gut, man. But when I was like, oh, I can't believe I never wanted to miss games. And here I am missing a game right now,
yeah.
As a dad, when you're writing this book, what were those wins and maybe unnoticed moments that you started to see in your own life?
For me, it's some of the moments that I would say that those small unnoticed moments, like one would be, picking up my daughter from daycare, right? The other one is going to be, today just going to surprise my daughter, right? And pick her up from pick up from school, right? And so she's expecting to go to this after school program, right? And, so I'll get to go pick her up from school and those are kind of those moments.
Yeah.
Being able to to coach my daughter's basketball team, right, or being able to show up and go to those games, travel, right, and so there's a lot. I mean, and again, it's yeah, I there's a lot.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, for sure. This might be a simple answer, but what's the best way for dads to connect with kids?
Be there.
I love it, man. That's what I was thinking, but I wanted to make sure.
I mean, that's it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times because of the the court system, right, and whatever system's in place, right.
Yep.
I think dads can oftentimes feel slighted or underrepresented in family courts, in terms of when we make decisions about where the kids stay. Dads tend to not necessarily get the representation that they deserve.
Sure.
In a lot of cases, and so because of that, I often see in the work that I do as well is that you get a lot of dads who have a lot of animosity towards the system, right?
Yep.
And then that can turn into animosity towards the other parent,
right?
And then what you have happen is, because of those feelings, and they're pretty intense, is then they tend to not want to engage them with their kids.
Yep.
Because they're just angry, right? And they're, and so trying to work with dads and recognize, hey, despite all of those things, right? Things that we can and cannot change, right? What are the things that you can change, right? Well, you can change directly deciding how much you're there for your kids and in what capacity you're there for your kids.
Yeah. Oh, so good, man. So good, dude. I love those moments, man. And it's so true, man. Just being there and being present and putting that phone away. And there's times where I'm like, I say, hey, at 5 o'clock, it's time to shut everything off. And then I'll catch myself with my phone. I'm like, dang it, put that away. Right. Like those moments. I love that. Dude, it's so awesome to have you on my show. Where can folks follow and connect with you? And I'll put a link in the description of the show as well, so folks can go and buy that book from you. What's the best place for folks to follow and connect with you on?
Well, they can jump on to my Facebook page. I'm in a process of trying to catch up with the times.
Okay.
So I do have a marketing wonderful lady, Amanda McKinnon, who is kind of in charge of. I kind of put her in charge of like all media stuff, right?
Cool. Okay.
But I do have a Facebook page. I do have a website, ForElementsTherapy.com. They can check me out on the Facebook page. I'm in a process of, I think, developing an Instagram kind of a link, but the book is solely available through Amazon.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Very cool. Now, one of the other things I wanted to ask you, last question, because I noticed on your website that you said you love music. I'm a big music guy. So what's that favorite type of music for you? Or do you have a favorite band that you like to listen to?
I'm really all over the place.
Okay.
As I've gotten older, it's kind of grown. It used to be just kind of hip hop and R&B, but
yeah,
I grew up in the Midwest, and so there's a lot of country going on. And so
okay,
I listen to country. Used to just despise all 80s music. As I've gotten older, I kind of found myself listening to 80s music more. And
yeah.
So I'm all over. I still listen to the hip hop. I still listen to R&B. But it really kind of just depends upon kind of what mood I'm in.
Right.
But I mean, I listen to a lot of things for sure.
Right on. Right. I'm more of a rocker guy, but I found myself like in the last week listening to like Tupac and Biggie and all those guys in that era. And I was like, man, this was so good. No one puts music out like this anymore,
Yeah. It really kind of puts in perspective when your parents used to say, hey man, you guys think this is music, man. This is music, right?
Totally.
You're like, what? Yeah.
Oh man. Lamar, it's such an honor to have you on my show, man. This will be so impactful for people and just so appreciate you coming on, man. Truly an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey man, I appreciate you having me on and appreciate your platform as well. So thank you.
Hey, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Hey, I just wanted to do a quick introduction. If you've not seen my show or you don't know the services that I offer, I wanted to drop them to you right now. One, I do voiceover work. So if you're looking for a voiceover person to cover your motivational videos, or maybe it's Kickstarter videos or whatever it is, let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out there. I also work with brands on brand and product videos. So they'll send me their products to do reviews or box openings. Let me know. I'd love to work with you on your product as well and help you get that product out there. I also love to be able to share my story. So if I can make an impact on one person at your next speaking engagement, let me know. I love to talk about my story. I love to talk about how our past does not define our future, and morning routines and being consistent, how to be around those successful people that are just going to lift you up. Let's chat about having me speak at your next event. Let's make it happen. Again, thank you so much for checking out this show. Check out ericallenmedia.com. Really appreciate your time. Have an awesome day.